Hey everyone, Boardgame Brody here with Meeple Mountain. I have a copy of my father's work. It's a worker placement game that includes a story of being a mad scientist, and the game is published by Renegade Games. And before we begin, I'd like to ask you if you'd like this video, and more importantly, subscribe to the channel. It's something super easy for you to do, and it really helps us out. Currently, 95% of those watching these videos have not subscribed yet, and I don't get paid to do these videos, so please subscribe. It would greatly help us and be very much appreciated. And now, like usual, let's get right into this game. Now, the game combines the app to tell a story with this main board here that does the playing. There is this book that is changed on occasions depending on the story and the choices you and the other players make in the game. Locations will provide ways to gain resources. Players will take one of their figures and place it on that location to gain that resource. As the story changes, the town changes, and so will the resources that you gain from locations on the board. This change can take away locations that provide certain resources, or a location that can be changed which adds more of the same resource or another resource. So what you need to know is that the worker placement spots will change, and they can change at any event that you trigger in the game. And this can happen multiple times. Let me explain the worker placement aspect of the game, and then I will talk about the storyline part and how they combine together to help each other out. Each player uses a player board that houses their current work progress, and each generation all players will start with their self, which is marked with a hexagon-shaped base, their spouse, which is on a circle base with spiky things, and one caretaker that is on a square base. Your team can grow with actions, and the other type of workers are servants that are on a circle base. Caretakers in the square base can only take actions on your own player board, and that would be by going here, which is to perform an experiment, here, which is to record knowledge, or here, which is estate affairs. Servants or your spouse, any figure with a circle, can go to town to gain resources or be used on some player board action spaces, but if they are used on the player board, you will lose those workers at the end of the round, placing them in the lost space. And there are ways that you can also gain these back. When going to town, you can go anywhere you would like, but if there is another figure on that location that you want to visit using a circle-based figure, you will have to pay 1 coin in addition. When placing down workers on a turn, you can also place more than just one worker to take additional resources of the same type. And this is also a smart thing to do when the location has a negative effect with it, because you gain your resources per worker, but only gain the negative effect once, even though you placed multiple workers there. Your spouse functions the same way as the other servants do, as they can go to town and take actions and also be discarded to take actions on your player board, but there will also be events that happen in the story that will be specific to them. Now, going back to yourself, you can do any action both when taking actions on the board and in town. But when going to town, you get to take the listed resources twice. And if someone is already in the location before you, you don't need to pay that 1 coin fee. So I try to save myself for the end of the round, but at times when you really need 2 of the same resources and you're limited on workers, you might just have to use yourself going to town early. Players will start with a hand of experiment cards of different levels, and many times you can take actions to gain more or swap out ones that you don't want for other ones. But you will have to start each generation by completing an A experiment first, and after that you can work on B experiments or continue to work on A experiments as well. After completing 2 B experiments, you can then start performing C experiments, and after performing 3 C experiments, then you can perform your masterwork that your father could never finish. When performing an experiment, you will use your caretaker or 2 servants, which will go to the lost space after the round, or yourself. You will pay the resources listed on that card on the top left to then gain whatever is listed on the bottom. This can consist of many different resources and sometimes negative benefits, and most importantly, it will include points. This is the main way to score points, but you should ultimately try to plan out how to get 1A, 2B, and 3C experiments done by the last round of the last generation to perform your masterwork, as it will give you mega points compared to the rest. So back to the player board. This spot is for estate affairs. You can either draw 3 experiment cards of any kind and then keep one of them and discard the rest, or you can gain $1. Money is used so that you can take actions on the map that have already been used by other figures, or sometimes new locations will cost money to take different actions. Or when going to the builder's office, you will use money to buy those bonus tiles. This last place here on your player board is to record knowledge. These cubes are needed when performing experiments, and they represent a certain type of knowledge. Blue represents chemistry, green for biology, yellow for engineering, and black for occult knowledge. But instead of gaining these resources each and every generation, you can instead spend it to record this knowledge so that you can pass it to the next generation. To move the knowledge tracker, you'll need to pay the matching knowledge shown above on that track. So the first time that you will do this, you will spend 1 to move it once to the right, and the next time you will need to pay 2 to move it to the next space, and then 3 of the same cubes to move it to the last space. And you will gain the benefits shown when moving it to or past a stated bonus. As you move your knowledge up, you will be able to use this track in place of needing to gain the actual cube of that resource to perform that experiment that you have in your hand. The black resource is occult knowledge, and it is wild for all other resources. Since it is more versatile, as you can gain knowledge with it, you become more creepy and the mob becomes more suspicious, both usually negative bonuses that you will gain by moving that track up. Speaking of being creepy, let's talk about that. The town's angry mob does not like creepy people and will increase in how riled up they get from said creepy people. Each scenario will change where the mob token begins, but it usually is placed to the left of the suspicion marker, which is this marker here. The mob marker can never move to the right of the suspicion marker, but it also moves left due to actions like this one on the board, where you gain a body, but also moves the mob marker and the player's creepy marker, or possibly due to the story, that can happen as well. Players will do actions that also move their creepy marker to the right, and others that move it back to the left. Whenever these two markers cross, the mob chases you out of town, and you can no longer take any actions in town with any of your figures. But you can continue to take actions in your estate on your player board. There is one exception to this rule, which is you can take the church action with a figure that is allowed to go to town. The church will help move your creepy token back so that you can continue to take turns as normal. And then there's the insanity track. This is done when completing some experiments or from other effects in the game, but you will move once up on this track each time that is shown. On the first space and all other places that show this compulsion card symbol, you will draw one of those cards. And this can be helpful but also hurtful. Let me explain. Each card will give you a task that you need to complete to then gain the points shown on that card. When you complete the task, you will discard it, and then you will move up the shown amount of points on that card. Some of these tasks are to complete a certain level of experiment or go to a location to gain a specific resource or whatever else it might have you do. But you will want to complete these to both gain points, but also at the end of the generation, for every 2 compulsion cards still in your hand, you draw a maladjustment card, which is always bad. And these are flipped face up for all to see and will last until the end of the next generation. As you move up on the insanity track, you might also move your creepy marker up at that time as well, or in some cases, you become so insane that you start losing your spouse and servants. And you'll move those figures to this spot, and they will then be moved to the lost area at the end of the round. The compulsion cards are good to give you those little points here and there, and you can also work on them while overlapping that goal with another goal to make it more worthwhile. This is called being efficient. Anyways, now let's visit the main board. This is just an example of the type of locations that you might have in town to visit for the shown resources, but there are 3 different modules that have storylines that will change the board. So this board changes as you flip the pages in this book. Sometimes it will add more locations, sometimes take away some, sometimes change some to offer different resources. Whatever the change is, the story will lead you to how to do it. Let me go through this first map for the first scenario, the cost of disease, so you can kind of get a feel of it. The farmer's market will give you an animal resource. All animal tokens are different just because they're cool components, but they all function the same. The blacksmith gives you 1 gear. The park gives you 1 chemical. The traveling caravan gives you 1 occult knowledge, but also moves your creepy token once on that track. The builder's office lets you pay for the available tiles that all have different abilities. They cost the price listed on the tile, and you will then add it to your board to the next available section, moving counterclockwise. Everyone starts with a storage shed, which gives you 1 resource of your choice at the beginning of each generation. Treat these tiles as upgrades that give you benefits that others won't have. If you get to the place on your board where it shows money on the bottom right, then you will have to start paying to place additional tiles in these sections. So they will get more expensive. The first 2 generations will have a big stack of tiles, but in the 3rd generation, these tiles are changed to tiles that more suit the end game. And going back to your journal, if you get to the end of any of the rows, it shows a +V. These are the vanity tiles which are placed to the side of the board, and you will be able to take one of those of your choice to place on your board, paying the cost of the spot if it's filled up already. If you ever gain a tile and you don't have enough money or you don't want to pay to place a tile in a new slot, you can replace another tile and not have to pay for the new slot. This is the church. If you go here, you will move your creepy token back, but you can also donate money to the church to move your creepy marker back even more. We will ignore the heart as that's specific to this module, and you will learn what it is and how to play it with the app. This is the town hall. Here you will move the mob to the right, leaving you a better gap from the mob marker and your creepy marker. And the last location is the cemetery, where naturally you will gain a body. But also move your creepy token to the right and the mob token to the left, bringing them closer together. Other locations might let you gain more workers of a certain type, let you gain money, let you gain one of the 3 types of knowledge, let you move your insanity marker back on the track, and a lot more variations of everything. The story also introduces locations that are specific to the story that I won't cover now, but just be ready for the map to change for good or worse. The only other thing I'd like to mention about the mechanics of the game is that you gain 1 A, B, and C experiment card at the beginning of each generation, and you will gain your choice of another experiment card at the beginning of each round, plus $3 at the beginning of each round. And that's on top of whatever other benefits that you gain from your buildings. At the end of each generation, you will have to give up all of the remaining resources. Yes, you heard that right. You don't keep anything from your stuff from generation to generation, so you will start from scratch again. Well, almost. Any knowledge that you recorded gets to stay so that you will have recorded knowledge to help with future requirements. All of your buildings will stay on your player board as well, and you will take 1 of your completed experiments to keep for the next generation. Everything else, gone. Now, deciding what completed experiment that you keep for the next generation can be a very strategic decision. So if you wanted to skip doing A experiments, you can place an A experiment on your stored area, and the next generation you can start doing B experiments from the get-go. Or you can place a B experiment from generation 1 so that you only need 1 A experiment and 1 B experiment so that you can start going on the C experiments. Then in the 2nd generation, similarly, you can choose to keep a C to help get your masterwork possibly quicker, or keep a B experiment as you can get more points for C experiments anyways. Or if you haven't already, keep an A so that you don't have to waste your time or action to perform an experiment late in the game for little points. And you can focus on the bigger, harder ones that have a better point payout. But besides all that, you will return everything else, including your money. So if you have a lot of money, invest in a nice new building tile to place on your player board. So now let's talk about the story, and this is a little trickier because I don't want to spoil any of the stories for you. But what I can say is that the stories will give players decisions. Sometimes it's a majority of those decisions that determines the outcome, and sometimes you determine your own path separate from all the other players' decisions. Many times, or most of the times, you will have to choose something without knowing what will happen from it. And the 3 stories are all very different, and within each one, you can take a path that will lead to very different outcomes. So the modules aren't a huge deal breaker because you can play through the same story and make very different decisions that changes the entire story and the entire way you play the game. I guess after playing it a lot, you might be less excited about the storyline, but for that reason, there is still a medium weight worker placement game left to continue to play. Stories might focus on certain mechanics in the game more heavily compared to others, and so players will then need to adjust their decisions due to the storyline. So really, there are 2 competing designs within this game. The worker placement mechanic and fulfilling experiment cards, while the board changes frequently, and then the other is the very heavy, lengthy, horror-rich narrative with unpredictable twists and turns. To like this game, you will need to like both of those designs, as they are smashed together in a pretty flat 50-50 blend. One isn't the hero over another. Do they get into each other's way? Well, kinda they do, but that's the beauty of this design. I'm not sure there is a game out there with a medium weight complexity game with a storyline that goes along with it. Forgotten Waters was what many hoped to be what my father's work is. Forgotten Waters has that awesome storyline, but the mechanics are very simple. My father's work brings the complexity up in the game, and it nails the storyline as well. Do you need someone to help take the next step? I think so. I wouldn't mind an even medium to heavyweight complex game that has a storyline with it. But just so you know, the game is not just a narrative story game, and it's not just a worker placement game. It's a great combination of both of those. Again, one not being a hero over the other. So for me, the game hits it out of the park for its mechanics. It works very well, and there are no problems with the design that I have encountered. Yes, I wish the game was a little bit more heavy in complexity, but I still enjoy what the game is. The game includes a changing board, changing up worker placement spots, resetting almost everything from generation to generation, and building up slowly to be able to complete your masterwork sometime during the 3rd generation. For me, the story is done very well, but it's a little long. What I mean is that the game takes a long time to play through, which doesn't really bother me, but when playing with others, I could see that they really wanted a shorter game, or they needed to leave and the game wasn't over yet. For me, the option for a more straightforward story would help to still follow what's happening in the game, but still play the game through. We tried skipping the story, but it made the game worse as we didn't understand what was going on anymore, and we still had to make some choices that were just guessing at that point. So I would suggest not skipping too much of the story. The best solution, again, I think, would be to make a straight-to-the-point version of the story to still tell what's going on and make your decisions within the context of the story. The other issue with the storytelling is that they use very big and hard words that I'm sure many of us don't even know the meaning of. I mean, I feel like I'm pretty educated myself. I have a doctorate degree, a master's degree, and 2 bachelor's degrees, and I was stumbling over some of the words, and because of that, at times I got lost as to what even the story was trying to tell us. Now, my degrees aren't in English, so maybe that's another thing as well, but still. Now, just because I didn't enjoy the big verbose words, maybe you actually will really like them. In fact, I know someone who would love reading a story with complex words. Steve, if you're watching this, I'm talking about you, but he also has an English major, so that would totally make sense that he would like reading something like this and playing a game like this. And that's exactly what you will be doing, is reading. I hoped the app would have a voiceover and read it for everyone, but sadly, you will have to read most of it yourself. Currently, there are some bugs in the app, and that doesn't bother me too much, as I know something can be worked out and fixed, so it's just a timing thing, really. The components are top of the line. The minis are cool, and they are designed so that you can place any character as yourself, snapping on your hexagon base on it, and you can pick who your spouse is and who your servants and caretakers are. Just this makes the game feel more personalized. And then all the animal tokens are all different, which is fun to pick out specific animals for your experiments. And the gears and the body tokens aren't all the same either. The chemicals are fun bottles that can be customized, which I actually will be doing, and I don't customize anything in any of my games. The game uses game trays to store everything, and it all fits in the box very well. If I had to pick the worst thing about the components, it would be the player boards that snap together. Not the actual design, but the cardboard seems like it could be a little thicker. But honestly, it only sits there on the table, so it doesn't really bother me. But that's the worst if I had to pick one thing. So they are great components. Ultimately, this will be a very popular game, and if you want a 50-50 mix of a medium weight worker placement game that changes due to your choices in a verbose story using elaborate details and words, and beware if you want a game that plays very long, over 4 hours sometimes when first learning it, but can probably be played in 2.5 to 3 hours with 4 experienced players in the long run. I love it. The length doesn't bother me. The story, which adds the length, is great, and in my opinion, isn't worth skipping over if you lose part of the game that way. Again, I'd love for the mechanics to be a little more complex, but I really enjoy the lower medium weight that it has as far as complexity. I anticipate more expansion modules to be added, so this game isn't going away, and it will have more and more stories and expansions to keep the game relevant and going strong. So get into the game now while it's still new by sending your servants out for collecting bodies, to collect chemicals and animals, and to perform experiments, or more importantly, your father's unfinished work. And doing this all in My Father's Work by Renegade Games. Again, this is Boardgame Brody, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Stick around and check out some other board game reviews to see what you might want to get to the table.